The NBA playoffs are here, and I'm getting my bets in on FanDuel. Talk to me, Chuck GPT. What do you know?
All sorts of interesting stuff, even Charles Barkley's greatest fear.
Hey, nobody needs to know that.
New customers bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets if you win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook.
21 plus and present in Ohio. Must be first online real money wager. $5 deposit required. Bonus issued is non-withdrawable bonus bets that expires 7 days after receipt. Restrictions apply. See full terms at FanDuel.com/sportsbook. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER.
Welcome to True Spies, the podcast that takes you deep inside the greatest secret missions of all time.
Suddenly out of the darkness appeared Bin Laden.
You'll meet the people who live life undercover. What do they know? What are their skills? And what would you do in their position?
Vengeance felt good. Seeing these people pay for what they'd done felt righteous.
True Spies from Spyscape Studios, wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello, and thank you for listening to The History of World War II podcast, episode 542, The Baron of Tank Killers. Last time, Operation Citadel was launched on July 5th, 1943. The German Northern Pincer, or attack, against the Soviet Central Front had made respectable gains, reaching the 3rd defensive line, well, in places. But the attack here was not an outright crushing of the Soviets. More besides, the Russian troops did not panic. This, combined with the seemingly small mistakes made by the Germans, like armor outpacing infantry, would have, in time, telling effects. Meanwhile, to the south, what was to have been a crushing air attack by the Germans almost ended up being the reverse. Still, General Zeidelman, in command of the 8th Air Corps, recovered and launched his fighters. The result of this was a blooding of the Soviet air arm. But already, not only were the Soviets moving up vast reinforcements in terms of men, tanks, and aircraft, but they still had more besides, for the plan was to go over to the offensive once the German attack was stalled. The question was, when would that moment come? As the German attack in the north had started out well enough, but showing cracks, the attack in the south would not unfold as it was on the German books. For General Hoth of the 4th Panzer Army, and leading this attack, had altered the route his panzers were to take, having them aim further to the northeast than originally instructed. Hoth saw several advantages to this, but as he had not told Manstein, he assumed there would be a price to pay. Hopefully, though, the results would speak for themselves. Before Hoth's panzers moved out and Manstein realized that General Van Tuten's air arm was seriously weakened, thanks to that morning's dogfights, German artillery let loose for 50 minutes, which was the equivalent of all the shells used in the battles of Poland and France. The front Hoth had chosen to attack on was 20 miles long, from Belgorod to Gertsovka, to the northwest of Belgorod. At 5 a.m., the panzers moved out. The plan was, instead of taking on the enemy along this 20-mile front, instead to have Zeidelman's dive bombers and ground attack aircraft create lanes. The panzers would then go along these routes, the infantry would follow, and the Soviets not directly attacked would have to fall back, or thus be threatened with encirclement. But again, the Soviets, though many had died from the air attacks, did not panic and run. Seeing German armor massed together before they launched their attack, the Russians went after them with their artillery and what was left of their air arm. On the German far left, before the town of Alexeyevka, the Grossdeutschland, an elite formation attached to the 48th Panzer Corps, came under fire even before moving out. Problem was, there was now a swamp in front of their tanks, having been created by last night's rain. The Panther tanks of Grossdeutschland progressed through the mud. It was slow going, that is, until they ran into a minefield not previously found by the Germans. Between the mines and the mud, the armor was stopped, But as battle had been given, the Fusiliers went on, without armor support. The best of the best they may have been, but without heavy armor support, their casualties started mounting quickly, and most of these injuries were caused by Soviet airstrikes, though outnumbered they were. Where was the Luftwaffe response? That will become apparent in time. Not until the afternoon was the division's armor and self-propelled artillery able to catch up to the suffering infantry, which is when another swamp was come upon. But here, deeper into enemy territory, the needed equipment to free these tanks could not advance. So there sat 36 tanks alone, now out of the fight. The German left flank adjusted as best as it could and advanced. Meanwhile, on the German right of this left flanking attack, things were better for the Grossdeutschland. The Panzer Grenadiers, Mark IVs of the Panzer Regiment's 2nd Battalion, and a combat group of the 11th Panzer Division advanced, but quickly came upon their own swampy terrain, as had the left. But instead of charging through it and getting stuck, men were sent out to find drier ground. This took time, but by 9:15 a.m., the armored vehicles were on the move once again, unencumbered. The Grossdeutschland's goal was the town of Cherkaska, 5 miles past no man's land. Besides the Soviet defenders already there, the 62nd Guards Rifle Division, the local commander threw in another 2 regiments of anti-tank guns. But this would not be enough, as German artillery had done a solid job of smashing the Soviet guns and tanks in this area. By the afternoon, German Tigers were weaving their way through what remained of the Soviet armor, getting ever closer to the town's edge, which ignited another battle. But here, the Germans had more of everything except infantry. But it was enough. By evening, the last of the Soviet guardsmen were evacuating the town. Even better for the Germans, while the elite troops of Grossdeutschland held the town, the 11th Panzer had already moved on, heading for Oboyan, about 25 miles or 40 kilometers away. As for the far left of this German attack, those objectives were reached. The towns of Giertzovka, Korovino, and then Krasny Polchinok fell like pins.
Going up. Prices keep going up these days. It feels like being on an elevator that only goes up. Going up. But not at Metro. We're pushing the down button. Going down. We've lowered prices. Get one line of 5G data for $40, period. That's 20% lower. And you get a free Samsung 5G phone when you bring your number. Only at Metro.
5-year guarantee on eligible plans. Exclusions apply. See website for details. Not available at Metro with T-Mobile in the past 6 months. Tax applies.
As for the attack of the German right flank along this 20-mile stretch, that was a different matter, simply because the 6th Guards Army defending this area, its commander, Lieutenant General Ivan Chustikov, had anticipated Hoth's main objective for the first day of attack. Here, the 2nd SS Panzer Corps would attack with more than 400 armored vehicles, which included 42 Tigers and a Neberwerfer brigade. At first, the attacks against the Soviet line here, like on the left, would be narrow but intense, virtual pinpricks of SS troops from left to right, Liebstandarte, Das Reich, and then on the far right, Totenkopf. With holes punched into the defensive line, followed by swift SS penetration, the Soviets would be forced to fall back, while the Totenkopf would guard against enemy attacks from the east. The SS divisions moved out, and one of the first towns come upon was Berezov. It and its defenders did not stand much of a chance. First, the Stuka dive-bombing attacks made the defenders cower. By the time the Soviets raised their heads, flamethrowers were coming at them. Like at Stalingrad, before entering a room, a grenade had been thrown in. Here, before a trench was entered, a burst of flame went in first. As one German flamethrower put it, the enemy could not fight against flamethrowers, and so we made good progress, taking many prisoners. To the left of the captured Berezov, the Liebstandarte advanced with its heavy panzer companies, and within these panzers were the tank aces of the Eastern Front. This goes back to Hitler wanting the best armies, best weapons, and best commanders for this operation. These men and their teams seem to have a sixth sense of when to charge, when to wait, and of course, accurate fire while on the move. One platoon of panzers was led by Lieutenant Michael Wittmann, the Black Baron, as he was called, who alone possessed all the elements needed of tank warfare. By the end of the war, he would be of the top 4 German tank killers, just 30 tanks behind the leader, Kurt Nitzbel, who had 168 confirmed kills. Spoiler, though he was about to prove his skill yet again, Wittmann's greatest moment would come in June of 1944 against the British 7th Armored Division, when he would destroy 15 tanks and 15 personnel carriers along with 2 anti-tank guns, all in 15 minutes. Back to the story. Leading the way, Wittmann's 5 Tigers were soon approaching Soviet anti-tank guns. Keeping up the speed, Wittmann knew this would work to his advantage while doing the opposite for the enemy. His tanks went up and down the line of anti-tank guns, blasting away, hitting more than missing. Soon a hole was made, and the platoon moved on. This brought them to a group of T-34s that was meant to be a backstop, but again, the Tigers, keeping up their speed, moved around, all the while firing on the T-34s from all sides. After enough of them were destroyed, the remaining T-34s fled. The way it was designed, the Tiger tank was best when keeping a respectable distance from the T-34s and firing its 8.8 centimeter gun, protected by its 120 millimeter armor. And Wittmann had figured this out right away. But in time, other tank commanders would forget this and pay the price. Not letting up on the Soviets, the panzers gave chase, themselves followed by Panzer Grenadiers. As they bounced along, the Liebstandarte's commander, Major General Theodor Wisch, called out on the radio, "Lunch in Kursk." Later that day, with Wittmann's Tiger still on the move, he soon received word that another panzer platoon was in trouble. Wittmann charged for the troubled spot, only to find Helmut Wendorf's platoon surrounded by T-34s. Seeing that one Tiger was already destroyed, Wittmann had his fellow tanks go after the AA guns, while he himself went after the T-34s. The surrounded panzer watched as Wittmann went around it in a circle, firing all the while. Soon, 3 T-34s were ruined. Wendorf used this chance to follow Wittmann out of the trap. They continued on, though both panzers were damaged by now. But by the time the day was over, Wittmann would have destroyed 8 enemy T-34s and 7 anti-tank guns. Meanwhile, 6th Guards Army Commander Colonel General Kaska was enjoying his second breakfast of the day in the middle of a beautiful orchard. Position has its privileges. But just as the Colonel General was about to receive a report, shells crashed all around him, while German planes flew over the 6th Guards Army's battle headquarters. The Soviets ran for their cars. The food, stacked upon a table, was forgotten. What Cherkaska could not know was that the Stavka was in more fear of Model's 9th Army in the north versus Hoth's 4th Panzer Army in the south, and thus had placed more of their resources there. And now, the Voronezh front in the south was paying the price. Cherkaska, with food on his mind, might have missed the earlier reports of the enemy's penetration that day, but General Van Tutten of the Voronezh front did not. At 4:30 p.m., seeing that the southern half was beginning to crumble, he ordered the 6th Tank and 3rd Mechanized Corps to get closer to Oboyan, and for 2 more tank reserve formations, the 5th Guards and 2nd Guards Tank Corps, to move closer and ready themselves for a counterattack. Thus far, all this fighting was to the west of Belgorod. To the southeast of Belgorod, Army Detachment Kemp's men had started out at 2:25 a.m. A part of this attack included the 3rd Panzer Corps, and by day's end, it had achieved a bridgehead 7 miles across and 5 miles deep. The 2 infantry divisions to its right also advanced, but gained less territory. And as it was the Soviet 7th Guards Army that had lost this territory, Van Tutten, at 7:40 p.m. this day, sent 3 more rifle divisions to assist the battled 7th Guard. Back to the west or left of Belgorod, the 2nd Panzer Corps had cut deep into the 6th Guards' defensive zone, while the Liebstandarte had gone some 10 miles. To the Lieb's right, Das Reich and Totenkopf had done even better, advancing 12 miles. Now they had access to the Belgorod-Oboyan highway, a solid, if not preferred start to Citadel. With darkness, the men on both sides started settling down, as best they could. As the men dozed off, suddenly awakened by a flamethrower's whoosh or gunfire, their officers got busy spinning the events of that day to their advantage in their reports. All told, in the south, the local Soviet commanders told the Stavka that 586 German panzers had been destroyed. Clearly not true. When the sun rose on the 6th, Hoth still had 865 panzers, all kinds. As for the headquarters of Hoth's 4th Panzer Army, the mood there was somewhat tense. Yes, the men and panzers had advanced, but had only broken through the first of 3 defensive lines. The days of dashing around of 1941 were over, for several reasons, but mostly coming down to the more numerous Soviet defenders being more sophisticated in their defensive capabilities. Next came the disappointing wonder weapons, the Goliath and B-4. And of course, though this brought Guderian no joy in saying "I told you so," the still unready Panther tank. Now out in the field, they started breaking down. 2 days later, 76 of them would stop on their own. Only 40 would remain operational. But the most significant reason for the lack of success in the north and the south, compared to what was expected, was the mentality of the Soviet troops and officers. Countless were the times since June 1941 when massive Soviet formations would break down, when anything went wrong, and to a degree that was expected/hoped for here. At least it was baked into the attack plans. But Hoth was getting a clearer picture of his adversary when one of his intelligence officers came to him with a single sheet of paper. The man read out the intercepted message to Hoth. "Am under attack. What am I to do?" But this was not panic or a cry for help. It was simply, "Here's the situation. How would you like me to respond?" In other words, cool, calm, even detached. As for the skies above, the day belonged to the Luftwaffe, if only again because the Soviet North was given the bulk of resources by the Stavka. Some 400 Soviet aircraft were shot down this day, while the Germans lost less than 30 aircraft. But that wasn't the problem, or the coming problem. No, for the German pilots, it was their fuel situation. Despite the number of times the Citadel had been pushed back, there was still not enough fuel stored away for all of these German planes to have 5 days of fuel running multiple sorties each day. Soon, formations would have to be chosen to take off, as only they could be given the remaining fuel. A big part of the why of this was the partisan attacks on the supply trains behind the main lines. What was emerging was fuel tactics. First, the Soviets made it hard for the Luftwaffe to receive enough fuel. Then they kept sending up their planes, forcing the Germans to respond or lose control of the skies. And the longer a battle went on, the more this equation played itself out, tilting ever more toward the defenders. As the days went by, fewer German planes would be in the air, replaced by Soviet aircraft. As the sun rose on July 6th, Soviet reinforcements, at least 3 tank corps strong, arrived on Rozhkovsky's central front to face the northern pincer. Meanwhile, General Model of Ninth Army was ready to release the majority of his armor against the center of the Soviet line. He had wanted to hold them for the final push on Kursk, but his men were already tired, and something had to break through this slog. In other words, both sides were committing more and more armor, hoping that it was the magic spell that would make disappear the others' resolve to fight on. Greetings, everyone, from Central Virginia. So I just want to say welcome aboard to John Adamson from South Pasadena, California. John, thank you very much for becoming a member and supporting the show. Always appreciated. And just randomly selecting 2 other members who are current members, obviously. Let's see here. C.S. Fowler and John Goulet, I believe is how I pronounce that. So thank you all very much, gentlemen. Again, greatly appreciated. I don't have any donations, but this weekend, and I just find this entertaining, this weekend there was the Greek festival in Richmond, Virginia. They have a bunch of food, they have the songs, the dancing, the stuff that you can buy, their paraphernalia, a lot of cool stuff there. I believe it's once a year. Anyway, I've never been. The wife said we're going, so guess what? We went. And as I'm going along, I got my food. I'm looking forward to digging into this. Someone comes up to me and right there in my face. No, I'm just joking. It was Al, a listener from Chester, Virginia, and Al S. I'm not sure if he wants me to say his name. Anyways, so somehow, and this still boggles me, somehow he spotted me in this crowd of hundreds, and I do literally mean hundreds. He spotted me, came up to me and said, hey, I listened to the podcast, whatever. It was just a cool moment. We took a picture. You can see it on Facebook. But anyway, it was just a cool moment that's only happened twice. The first time was in Rome, which again, even stranger, right? So anyways, Al, I hope you had a great time with your family, your friends. We had a great time. The Greek festival was amazing. The food was amazing. The music and everything else. So anyways, if you ever get a chance to check it out in the future, please do so. And Al, I just have to say, you made my day. So thank you very much for that. So anyways, we're now deep into Citadel. They're committing more armor. Obviously the massive, much larger tank battles are about to take place. And then we'll go through this, set up the Eastern Front of 1943, and then stop and bring in the Yanks and see what they can do. Take care, everyone. And Al.